Welcome to another episode of the Brand Power Analysis. Today I have an old friend of mine, Brian, on. Brian, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am old. As a matter of fact, I appreciate you pointing that out to your audience. Zach, good to see you. Always had tons of respect for you. My name is Brian Wood, and I am a coach, and not an X's and O's coach, but I'm a coach with transition and executive coaching, athletes, former athletes, humanitarian efforts, and learning and development. All that stuff rolled into one. So that's me, Zach.
That's great. It sounds like a journey. And I don't think I've ever even really, I think we might have talked to it a little bit when we were in Miami, but I don't think that we ever dive deep into your journey and how you got to where you are today. So why don't you kind of tell everyone a little summary of yourself and the journey you took?
I will. So, and it's funny too, when we were in Miami for that event, right, to help out athletes, former athletes, that was about 10 minutes before COVID hit.
Yeah, I know.
And everything changed, right? Like at the Super Bowl. And so anyway, what a journey it's been. So for my journey, I went to a small school in New Jersey, played basketball there. It was the best, like great memories, great lessons. It really served me as I continued to grow. After college, I played in money tournaments. I never made a bag of money, but a lot of money tournaments, tons of traveling, several different countries. I ended up being a professional kicker with the NFL. And that's not true. I'm just making stuff up now.
I was going to say, I'm like, I think I would remember that one.
I'm just stealing your dad's identity. Like, how inappropriate was that, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, so it ended up, I headed down that path of just loving the game and doing anything to be around the game. And then ultimately it was over. And I played at a smaller level, right? Small college, money tournaments, but not big time like your dad. So I can only imagine how it was for people that were at the highest level, what that transition may have been like. But anyway, so I went into the corporate world. That's kind of a natural progression for athletes and former athletes, I think, to compete. And there's nothing more competitive like than being in business and being in the real world and grinding it out. So I had like 30 years in the corporate world before it dawned on me that I just wanted to do more that was more impactful. So I went down the path of coaching. And I got to tell you, Zach, I've never worked harder, but I've never been more satisfied. There's a difference between being just exhausted from transaction type stuff and just being overwhelmed with gratitude and realizing that, you know what, I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I know that's kind of a roundabout way, but that's part of my journey. And it's a lot longer than that, but that's the short version.
It's always longer, right? It's always hard to sum it up. So when you went through that transition, what do you think were some of those difficulties that you made when you had to go through that transition?
So it's a great question. And so I'll tell you a quick story. So way back when, again, 100 years ago, but in college, I remember we had a practice, and it was a pretty intense practice. We had a big game coming up. And I remember one of our guards was just not taking the whole warm-up real seriously. And I'm getting to a point, bear with me. And he's just messing around. He's just doing these little half-effort layups. And the captain says, hey, man, knock it off. Let's go. We got a big game. Next play, same thing. And the captain walked up and just blew him up, punched him right in the face. And I know that is not the most conventional leadership, but when the coach came running over and says, what happened? What's going on here? No one said a word, right? That's just, no, this is how this is leadership. This is how we handle that kind of stuff in the locker room. And so the moral of the story is when you transition, I've noticed that hardly ever works in a boardroom or at a staff meeting, right? That kind of an approach. So I think the struggle is, it's twofold. It's saying, okay, I've got to keep the intensity that really helped me and shaped me. That competition, like that really fueled me. But you have to use that as a secret weapon, as opposed to allowing people to push your buttons. So that was one of the takeaways from me. Like, as I grew up and as I matured, I realized that, I'm not going to give you the power, Zach, to just push my buttons. Like, if I have to tap into something that I know I have, I'm good with that. But I'm not going to have someone push my button at their will. I'm not going to give, we were going back and forth today, right? I'm not going to surrender my power. I'm not going to give you the power to control me. I'm the one that's running this. And when I need to tap into that, I feel like my crazy might be better than your crazy. And I'll use that, but I'll only use that when it's to my advantage. So sometimes you get lost with that transition. You don't realize that it's a secret weapon, the things that you've been exposed to, as opposed to just something that you use every single day.
So how are you able to overcome that, like that situation? And when you probably, I mean, you probably is one of those things that kind of just happened over time, but you probably have like a key moment in time that you were like, oh yeah, like that's the aha moment. Yeah. That's the mindset shift.
That's a great question. So it seems like, and a lot of the things, I know we work a lot, we talk a lot about our interactions with athletes. So much of what the best athletes do is deliberate practice, right? They don't just, okay, I'll show up and hope I have a good workout. They do the drills over and over again. When there's 2 minutes left in the game, this is what I'm going to do. In this scenario, when I'm faced with this scenario, this is what I'm going to do. I'm ready. And so it's a similar approach. For me, I don't think it was overnight. I think it was constantly practicing and constantly questioning myself, like in a good way, right? As an athlete, you're saying, how can I get a little bit better? And from a development perspective, from a leadership perspective, it's very similar. So how can I get a little bit better every day? And not beating yourself up at the end of the day, the week, the month, the quarter, but reflecting frequently. What could I have done better? Not from a place of judgment, but from discernment. What can I do better? You know what? That didn't serve me. When I blew up like that, that really didn't serve me. And I lost my power and I lost my cool. And that did, what am I going to do next time? All right, let's do some more drills. Practice, practice, practice. Better, better, better.
I forgot what I was going to say there. So I tend to feel like even as a leader myself, that stuff never goes away, correct? So do you feel like you're always kind of going through the, hey, I have to look at myself, I have to grow, I have to always make sure that I'm, making sure I'm trying not to be too, because we're both business owners, and so I feel like there's such a correlation between the two, being an athlete, being a business owner. But I feel like that's been my hardest challenge myself, because you even if you have this end goal in mind, you tend to there's no real stepping stone set forth just for you to kind of look at yourself and say, hey, am I doing better than yesterday?
Yeah. So I just finished reading a book, Atomic Habits, James Clear. And that's what you're reminding me of here, right? It's the small habits that, how am I going to get better than I was tomorrow? It's not like earth-shattering stuff. It's doing the deliberate practice over and over and over again. And one of the passages in the book talks about, okay, a plane is going from, I think it was like LA to New York. But if you go pilot for whatever reason goes 3.5 degrees off target, and now everyone is like, hey, what are we doing here in DC? And over time, that's the moral of the story, right? Over time, those small habits that comprise that 3.5%, that's what changes the game. Mm-hmm. So it's the small habits. And I also think, Zach, I think there's also some value in embracing the fact that there is no finish line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's
The
not.
journey. It's the journey, right?
Yeah, it's a journey, and there's a difference between really leaning into it and enjoying the deliberate practice and the pursuit, as opposed to saying it's the grind. And even the slightest change, and maybe this is an atomic habit of how you show up, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's you've got a workout, you're going to work, you're making some sales calls, whatever it is, changing the narrative from I've got to go work out to I get to go work out. I have an opportunity to do whatever it is.
Mhm.
Like they say, the things that we complain about, other people pray for. So just sometimes changing the narrative to connect to that 3.5% makes all the difference in the world.
It's funny. I was talking to my wife the other day about, and this is
That is funny that you'd be talking to, right?
Well, you're talking about a good subject that was similar to what you're talking about, and showers, for instance. Like she hates taking showers and things of that nature, but you think it's boring. Where I'm like, we have 2 children now. We have a 3-year-old and we have a 5-month-old.
Wow.
So just getting alone time for like 15, 30 minutes, I'm like, I'm in
Yeah.
there. I'm just like, this is a blessing now. Like,
Yeah.
just going to the grocery store. I'm like, oh, I'm getting out of the house for a little while. Like I get to walk around, and other people would be like, oh, I have to go to the grocery store. And I'm like, yes, grocery store.
This is an event, right? This makes perfect sense. I love what you're saying, because there's some truth to that in most things. Just like the way you receive that is there's some, that whole idea of there's a gift here somewhere. I'm driving 3 miles to go to the store. I get to listen to something I like on the radio. I get to observe around. Like there is something positive there, and more times than not, people will make that left turn into the negativity, as opposed to saying, "Hey, this is pretty good. This is not a bad thing."
Well, and it's hard not to, right? I mean, I still do it every day, and it's that concept of like the atomic habits is kind of telling yourself, like catching yourself when you're doing it and trying to refigure your brain when that's happening. I mean, one of the biggest things recently for me is, my wife's always like, why are you working on holidays? Like, why you work on holidays? And I'm like, well, it's actually a great day to work, because it's like I get alone time. I'm not talking to anybody. My employees are all off, so I can kind of just sit down and do stuff without having any sort of interruptions. And that's why I enjoy it so much. And so instead of looking at it negatively, like you said, like we were saying, like, oh, I work on the holidays. I'm a business owner, I'm a grinder. It's like, no, I just enjoy working on the holidays because I have more time to myself.
Yeah. And from her point of view, and not to pick on your wife by any stretch, right?
I'm just using her because she's the only one.
No. And what I'm saying is, like, for any perspective, right? If the wife is saying, not your wife, not my wife, just so we're clear, if the wife is saying that, man, my husband, he's always working, like, this is the worst. He never spends time with me. And a different way to look at that is how? What's a different narrative? Oh my gosh, that guy is breaking his face for me and our 3-year-old and our 5-year-old. Like that changes everything.
Yeah.
So it's all of us. Like it's everything, and it's really everything personally and professionally. Like changing the narrative and really thinking through your thoughts. That whole idea, metacognition, is thinking about your thinking. We have someone did a study. There's like 60,000 thoughts that bounce around in our head every day. And we're not talking about dissecting each of those, but we are saying, what are my patterns and what are my tendencies? And how can I shift my mindset to a place where the best of the best, you look at the best of the best in every industry, in every sport, how do they show up differently? Because they don't think the same. They're a little bit different, as you know, in a really good way. So how can I replicate that kind of an approach that they take and be just as great in my arena?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think as a business owner myself, I tend to, I have bad anxiety. So I tend to, wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning because it starts going on up here. Yeah. And I take that opportunity now to be like, oh, now I can, might as well go. That's my gym time. So I use that. I'm like, all right, how do I embrace that in a way to kind of push out and do something that I really have no time for with two small children.
I remember those days, Zach. I remember those days, and it was like the greatest fantasy is if I could just have an hour of sleep. So and at the same time, I've got to say, there will be a time in your life where you say, oh man, that was the best. They were 3 and 5. It was just so amazing. It's
we're
almost
going
like,
through that right now. We're going because we're finally starting to look at daycare for one of them. And I'm like,
wow,
finally have to let them go.
Yeah.
Like that first step towards when they leave, you're like, finally have to, but you embrace it. And that's what I tell, me and my wife talk about how blessed we are because we both, so, I have a virtual business, we're a branding agency, but everything's virtual. And we can thank the, 2020 for that situation. But in some blessings, it did pivot some things in the environment that helped certain people out. And I'm like, we're so blessed because we get to stay home. Yes, we're full-time parents and we're watching our children and trying to work, but we get to be with our children up until their developmental stages, so
right.
It is nice. But back to the subject. I could talk about my kids all day. They're always on top of my mind. So you work with plenty of CEOs and plenty of athletes themselves. So let's talk about some of those correlations. Like when you work with athletes, what do you think make them or have them, how do they transition to becoming such good business owners?
So I would say not all of them do. I think the ones, like if you looked at the common denominators, the ones that excel realize whatever the sport, most people could say that track is just you against the clock, but you have a team around you for nutrition and stretching and weightlifting, like all the above. So I feel like the athletes that do really well transitioning recognize the fact that, okay, it wasn't just me. I put in the work, no question about it. My work ethic was insane, and I leveraged the people around me. So we can really get into trouble when that ego, when we start to believe that it was just us and I can push through, and I've done it before on my own. And I think the athletes that do the best when they move into that business environment, they realize that, wow, I had a team when I was excelling on the field, the ice, the track, the diamond, whatever. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to actively reach out. In some ways, I'm going to be humble. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to ask Zach for help. I need some help, Zach. I know this is your sweet spot. I know this is your lane. I want to do great, and this is not my thing. Can you help me out? So those are some of the things that come to mind, Zach.
Yeah, there's this analogy I like to kind of do when I talk to athletes, and it's kind of went back to what you said when they're on the team and they're playing. I mean, I think a lot of sports fans, if we're talking to a lot of college and high school that may still really be fans of the sport as well and haven't gotten deep into it yet, will kind of see that, you have your coaches, you have your, like you said, your nutrition team, your weightlifting team, you have offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, you have the opposite team. And so it's like, okay, one person's catching the ball, but one person's saving the ball, or you have a lineman who doesn't even touch the ball. So those are all different positions, and they all need to work together to form a good game. Not just that, but you also need to look at the competitors and say, all right, this is a different team I'm playing. This is a different approach. And so like what you said, like teamwork is necessary. And I feel like one of the phrases I'm starting to say to a lot of people is, time really does equal money when you're first starting, but you need to learn that money actually should equal time. Like you have to learn that, hey, you need to go out there, you're going to need to hire people. And I've seen it too. Like you said, a lot of athletes come in and they start off and they're like, oh, I'm going to do this all myself. And I'm like, there's a point when you can learn it because you need to hire for it. But there's also a point on you just need to let go and focus on what you're good at and let build a team around you.
No question. And a couple of things come to mind. There was when you talked about the trainers, Klay Thompson, when the Golden State won this year, NBA championship, there was a picture I saw that showed him embracing his not therapist, the physical trainer. And it was just so cool because I don't know the guy's name. And I know that Klay put in tons of work, but at the same time, he knew that that team member, that strength coach was the one that played this huge role in his overall success. So that was just kind of interesting.
No, that is very interesting that, that the ones that the fans don't see, like, oh, the physical therapist helped us win the game,
Yeah.
like, really? Like, yeah, kind of. So you kind of already mentioned some of the struggles. What would you say if you had to look at, you said some of the good, the things that really that's more of a struggle than anything, but do you feel like there's anything positive, like anything great they can come out?
Oh, yeah, I kind of turned that question around, I guess. Okay, so on the other side of the coin, I would say you think about the situations that athletes are in, performing under pressure, performing under adversity, working in a team environment, making decisions, like all those things that it feels like, and maybe when they go out into the real world, it feels like, oh, I've got to start out all over. No, you don't. You brought all of those skills. The majority of those skills translate really nicely to the real world. But sometimes that it goes back to the narrative. Sometimes we tell ourselves that, oh, I've got to start out from square one. I've got to pay my dues. Well, in a lot of ways, you've already paid your dues. So if you have someone who's competing for a job, who is trying to run a business that hasn't got hit in the face 100 times, fallen, gotten back up, do you think they're going to be as competitive as you? I don't think so. So I think we've got to remind athletes of the reality that you've already been through a ton. You've already trained for this moment. And all the things that you did, regardless of what your sport is, these are things that you can absolutely leverage as you walk into the business world. So we shouldn't convince ourselves that we've got to start from the very bottom, because we don't. We shouldn't.
Yeah, they have this special ability to influence. Most athletes do, as you know. And I keep telling everyone that, like, athletes are the next influencer. And I feel like from a positive standpoint, not from, going out and just showing off, sitting on a boat in the, with a car on the boat, but really, like, you have this message that you could give out to the world, a positive message that you can give out, where business owners, when they start out, they're paying for exposure and marketing,
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying athletes don't need to pay for that stuff. What I'm saying is that they really just need to find what they're good at, find their values. And as you said, and they have this special ability to help the world in a much more spoken manner.
They can use that platform for amazing things, and they could head in the wrong direction. So absolutely, huge opportunity. And you said something, Zach, that reminded me of another point I wanted to make, and that's the idea that, or the question, what's the best use of your time? So when you're talking about, hey, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to get someone else to do that, I'm going to hire someone, that's the question you have to ask yourself. As an athlete, former athlete, business owner, like, is that the best use of my time? Mm-hmm. And more times than not, your time is probably spent connecting, building rapport, cultivating relationships, as opposed to doing that task that someone else could do. So yeah. I think that's something that another one that the best athletes realize, that I'm going to have someone do that with the best businesses and business people. I'm going to have someone do that. I'm going to pay that. I'm going to invest that so I get my time back, so I can use that time for this. And just the opposite side of the coin, if for those that are not successful.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because every time we work with an athlete prospect with what we're doing, that's the first thing we say to them is, you do what you're good at. Let us focus on the marketing and branding department. You can, your internal marketing department, you'll still have to somewhat work with operations, but I can kind of help you with that if needed. Find some people, but do what you're good at. Be the face of the company. I mean, you see a lot of CEOs, that's what they do. I mean, especially what some of the larger ones that you may follow too, they give a lot of the inspiration. That took them years, but that's, athletes have this extra ability to really just get paid to speak before, most business owners do.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
so do that,
Big advantages for sure. And you reminded me of something else, Zach, that it's interesting how, and this is really unrelated to everything, but you reminded me of it when we were in Miami and supporting the NFL players doing their pitch competition. It's amazing that on the outside looking in, you might say, well, this guy played at a Super Bowl. He actually has a Super Bowl ring. He played in front of millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the one guy, you probably know who I'm talking about, was just, he said, I was shaking like a leaf up there when I had to deliver my pitch. So just because you're really good at something over here doesn't mean that you can be good at everything without help. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because like you said, athletes tend to go certain directions. And a lot of times they'll either open a business related to the industry, they'll go out and they'll do public speaking. That's kind of their business, or they'll become an announcer. That too, and it's one of those situations where I've met plenty, if not multiple PR people, because we have a couple on staff that we partner with, but that will teach athletes how to be broadcasters, because they have that kind of in already. So, but they still need to learn it. You see like Tony Romo and all those people going up there, you think they just went up on stage and they were good like that. No, they behind the scenes, I bet you not that they had someone sit there with them and they paid a good amount of money to learn like how to be a better broadcaster. Because that in itself is, there's a degree for it. You have to go to school for it and all that nifty stuff. And so it's funny you said that. So in regards to athletes and you working with athletes, is there anything that they can learn from maybe some other athletes that you brought a couple up, but some other athletes that may be out there right now that they could say, hey, this guy's doing it right, or this guy is tending to head the right path that they could learn from?
So I would say this, without getting specific, my example is going to be Encyclopedia Britannica. And you are way too young to understand what life was like before the internet, Zach, right? But that was our knowledge base. Go to the encyclopedia. This is amazing. We can learn anything here. And now, fast forward, we are in the information age. So not specifically one person, I would say the strategy between Instagram and being able to reach out and connect with anyone, any time zone, and really understanding who's got the best brand that maybe is similar to what I'm trying to do, and what are the habits that are connecting that person that is working. I think that's the trick behind it. It's almost like, so you're going to a buffet, and this is a bad example because I normally eat everything at a buffet, but you pick and you choose, right? And in this space and in this age where there's not the Encyclopedia Britannica, it's way bigger and way better in a good way. I can do some shopping and say, wow, that is an amazing brand. I've got to reach out to that person, to that company. I've got to replicate what they do, not completely copy, but just replicate maybe either the habits or the themes or how they show up with their branding. So that's my strange answer. Encyclopedia Britannica. You can Google that.
It's kind of similar to what I said earlier. When a team goes out to play another team, you have to study that team. You don't know their playbook. You have to watch tape. You have to do all that. But then the next week you're playing another team. Your strategy is going to be completely different based off of that. And I like to tell athletes, it's very similar to your audiences and your competitors. Like, okay, you want to, I had and I won't say names either, but I had an athlete that I was talking to, who was creating an app that he said was a competitor against Uber Eats. But his partner was in solar. So he's like, oh, we're going the solar model. So they were like, oh, we're going to go do this and we're going to have this and we're going to have, and by that, I mean, they're going to do certain sales rep things. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're like the Uber Eats of this field. Like you don't need to, that the solar model isn't the direction you need to go here. And so I think and that was a very broad answer and people probably don't understand what I mean, but long story short, you're so much information, like you said, out there, like, and that's what we do. You probably do something very similar when you go into a company, and I call it a competitor analysis of some sort, where we kind of go through and study competitors for branding, all the marketing stuff and all that nifty stuff, not to copy, but to say, hey, what are they doing? How can we improve? If they have a different audience, how do we tailor that to our audience? You know,
gap analysis, right? This is where I am. This is the gap, and this is where I want to be. That's the vision, for sure. That's a huge part of it. And I would also say that what you're saying, Zach, reminds me of the Marshall Goldsmith book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And so athletically, I think about, oh, okay, in 7th grade, everyone can make a right-handed layup, I guess, unless you're lefty, right? Right hand, right hand, right hand. Now, wait a minute. Now you're telling me I have to do something completely different, and it's ugly, but it's growth, right? And it's like you have success over here. We ran 42 dive. It always works. It always works. It never fails until it does. Now you have to do something else. So that's what it's like in business and athletics, where, okay, I'm so comfortable doing this. All right, for me to do the next level here, I've got to get uncomfortable, do something that feels terrible, but have the faith and understanding that's what's going to help me grow, not staying in your comfort zone, right?
Mm-hmm. And a good example I could say from an athlete perspective is when you see an athlete in a certain position and the coach tells them to move over to another position because they can see that they're not as good at that position yet, but they can be 100 times better than the position that they're in. And you see a lot of athletes kind of, not the good ones or the bad ones, but you see a lot of them like, oh, I don't want to do that. But then you have other ones that are like, I'm down for it. Let's give it a shot, you know? And then they end up doing great in that position. Even athletes that you see that are close to retirement that are like, they're like, oh, we're going to move you to this position. If he were not to move, he'd probably be retired because he's just not working for that position anymore. From the business world, it's very similar. Like you said, there's a time to pivot. There's a time to, and I think 2020, I think taught a lot of people a lot of stuff. And the only reason I say that is just say 2020, so everyone knows, because I don't want to get demonetized for this video. But is like we recently went through it, and I don't mind talking about it because it's part of natural growth of business. Is I hit what a lot of people call the 5-year burnout. You know, or 5 years in, we were doing pretty good with what we were doing. I had automations in place. I had all the systems. There were a couple things in place that I just saw weren't working. One was our conversion rate, because of the way we were pushing this kind of service. And the other one was, I just realized it was boring. You know, I was like, you know, I could do this and make millions and millions of dollars. Like I could. And I'm like, but I'm bored already. Like, and so we still do those services, of course, but it's not a highlight of what we do now. So now we pivoted, and my why has been still, hey, I'm still going to work with athletes, but let's do something different here. Like athletes want to come to us, great, but let's really start on helping that mental health issue early. So we're starting to develop courses. And it's funny you said Atomic Habits, because we present that in one of our first course that's coming out. Nice. But we're turning much more into a branding and education company. Nice. And so we want to help college kids, you know, learn their why early, knowing that, hey, being a professional athlete isn't your end. That's just the beginning. Like that's going to help you. So let's help you find your why now, so you can find either the right degree or the right passion that can mix with that passion, and you can find something, you know, further on. And so we're kind of doing that a little bit. That's part of our growth process. But just so people are aware, like pivoting's normal. I mean, you see a lot of companies having to do it time and time again. And so you have to look at the pivot from a mindset perspective. Are you failing, or did you fail? Probably yes, a little bit you did, because if not, you wouldn't have to take this pivot. But those learning examples, like you said, are what are going to help you make it to the next level. Who cares if it's 2 years? Who cares if it's 20? Who cares if it's 5? You know, it comes when it comes, but that's how you're going to get to the next stage. I would have never pivoted the way I have if it wasn't for realizing
everything went virtual.
Yeah.
Right? It
Yeah.
changed the whole game for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you talk about these things, and it makes perfect sense. And one thing that shows up for me, Zach, is just if you're playing too conservative in business or on the field, right? If you never get a penalty, you're probably playing it too safe. So that's not good enough. Same thing with business, right? You've got to take chances. You've got to pivot. You've got to do something different. And then the other thing is passion. If you really are not excited and waking up like you at 3 a.m. and thinking through stuff, then maybe you're not doing the right thing. And someone told me about the why, and that's connected to passion. Someone talked about asking yourself, if no one were paying you any attention and no one were paying you any money, what would you do? And that can help you understand often what you're passionate about. Right now, you can make a life in that space. Oh, that's a pretty good place to be. And then the other thing, and ironically, that's pretty close to your organization, is creativity. Like you've got to think there's a way to make it work. You just have to get creative and find it and innovate, and not just stay in that almost like that victim mode, if you will.
Yeah, the victim mode. And it is hard. Like you said, it's hard to get out of the victim mode. And it's funny you say that because, you know, I have a couple books up here that I've read, and Scaling Up is a good one, but the reason I'm going about that is because, you know, there are certain spectrums in business, very much like, you know, a team. You always have a quarterback, right? You know, of course, there's a couple plays without the quarterback, but for the most part, you always have a quarterback on the field. You always have a wide receiver. You always need a golf club of some sort to hit a golf ball, you know, like, so you always have certain structures in place, and it's just finding your way to gain that knowledge and then being creative around how you could take that base structure and how you can transfer it to good. I think back to your conversation earlier about athletes struggle because they want to do it all themselves, is I think a hard time not just athletes have, but business owners have, is expenses in general. Like they don't realize how much money it costs to bring value to people. And I think even the end users don't understand as much. Like, oh, he made this video and he did this and he just wants a sale. It's like, I'm paid $2,000-$3,000 worth of my team's time to create that video for you.
Right. Yeah. Good point. There's also the clarity too, right? Like I know athletes, and I know we've had discussions about this, athletes and business owners both will show up without that clarity. We'll stay in the athletic space. And so when you ask, well, what do you want to do? What's your vision? What's your why? What would you like to do? And it could be really good intentions. I want to help people. I want to help kids. Like, what does that mean? You've got to keep digging and digging. And oh, what does that mean? Oh, you want to help kids at risk in the age of 7th to 9th grade with mathematics skills or whatever the case may be. You've got to keep digging. And sometimes we stop and we just, and it's not lazy, it's just that we just don't know. Like the example you talked about, someone goes down that path of being an announcer. I didn't know, what am I supposed to do after I play? I guess I'll be an announcer. I guess I'll be a coach. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to kind of follow the crowd, as opposed to taking a step back and really investing time, maybe an Atomic Habit, in understanding what you're really, really passionate about, and then making a strategic plan, gaining clarity to get there.
Yeah, I actually did another podcast before this with an athlete who is creating an app.
Wait a minute, I'm not the only guest on this show. What's going on?
I should have done a double. Right? And he was telling me something very similar to you, where he was talking about, you know, when he found out his transition was done, he when he was at that transitioning point, he set out a 5-year plan, and we were talking about how hard it was for him to, you know, how much hard it must have been for him to sit down and be like, I need to come up with this plan. And then 2 years later, he was a valet. And we are talking about, hey, if you didn't have your why and know that in 5 years, 10 years, I want to be doing this, this is my passion, you would have been struggling being a valet. But the fact that you came up with this plan and you had your why, you knew that being a valet was, for his instance, was because he wanted to be around some of the higher elites that needed their cars, whatchamacallit. So he knew at that point that it was part of his goal, and I think that that's something that, really trying to push on these athletes is what you just said is the why. And like, you want to work with kids, great. And there's nothing wrong with, I like to use this analogy all the time, because we had a client a couple of years ago that wanted to be a veterinarian, and an athlete, a veterinarian. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And so they were becoming professional. They got their degree, became a veterinarian, but they went to become a professional. And there's nothing wrong with that why, the steps to get to that why shifting. And so it was like, hey, well, maybe in 2-3 years, you don't want to be a veterinarian anymore. Maybe, but you still want to work with animals. Like you said, but their main goal is really, I want to work with animals and stuff. So then they open a foundation, or they open a nonprofit to help endangered species, or there's a plethora of different ways you can go about it. But it was back to what you said with, finding your why. And then like I told you, we loved working with athletes, and it was just what we were doing wasn't working. And so I'm still able to hit my why with helping athletes, but doing it in a different way.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. And it's also, Zach, it's also ironic, this contradiction of what athletes experience. And what I mean by that is, when they're during their playing days, this is when you eat, this is what you eat, this is the time to lift weights, and now you have to watch film, and now it's sprints. Like, everything is so structured. And now what? Now when that phase of your world is over and you don't have that kind of structure in terms of the next 5 years, then it really just magnifies the confusion and the anxiety, right? You can just imagine. I've been in this space for X amount of years, and I've always had this structure, this itinerary, this agenda. And now it's like, okay, now I got to figure it all out by myself. What am I supposed to eat? And that's why a lot of people will head down, and I know you're a fitness guy also, Zach, they'll head down the path of just like nailing it in terms of their health and wellness and energy. And then things can spiral from there. So, again, back to the habits that we were talking about.
It's true. It's true. And that's one of the reasons I got into this field, because I saw such a connection between business and mental health, and, finding some sort of something that's in your control what it's really what it comes. Because business, the difference, being an athlete is actually very similar to having a job. Because it somewhat is, but they're more freelancers, but that's a different story. Is that, they have this regiment and this routine, and when they have a job, they somewhat have this regiment and routine that they can nail down as well. I remember when I was in the corporate world, I was able to make my lunch every morning. I was ready. I was going there. I knew when I was going to eat my snacks and my lunch. I knew what time I was going to go to the gym. And now it's like you said, with the food, it's like, I have 2 children. I'm trying to run this business, and we have to do podcasts. We have to do prospect call, everything you have to do at different times, to impede for everyone else's schedules. And so
you get to do podcasts, right? You don't
I get to do podcasts. I don't have to. I get to do podcasts. Yeah. That going back to what you said earlier, the habit shift. Good call. But it's finding those things that are in your control, and somewhat that are in your control. You do have control over going to the gym. You do have control over, finding an hour, or saying, hey, I'm going to watch what I eat, or I'm going to do this. And those little things are like the habits you were mentioning, where it's like, these are going to help me start small, start with the food, and then start with that. And then a lot of those, I've seen a couple athletes here. One in particular, that in Scottsdale, he has a gym now, and he's pretty successful with his gym. Nice. It just goes to show you get your mind and you just shift it, shift it to something.
And even something as small, like to your point, right? With the nutrition, instead of having that soda, I'm going to have water, right? Over time, that's that 3.5 degrees that we were talking about with Atomic Habits. That changes the game. So we've got to do that. And I would say it's important to give ourselves grace,
Yes.
and bounce back. So I could seriously crush an entire pizza pretty easily, right? True story. That's not the end of the world, not the healthiest thing, not the end of the world though. Now, if I do that for 7 or 8 days straight, that's a problem. So once again, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I had that piece of candy. I might as well just have, 3 chocolate bars. Like, wait a minute, give yourself some grace, get back in the mix. Get back in the mix and get those habits going again. Start over.
This is from the guy that said he goes to a buffet and eats everything at the buffet.
That hurt. Are we recording here? Can we edit this?
No, I do the same thing. I always have to have a little bit of every. I used to love buffets, man. I used to go a lot back in the day. That was my thing. And now I'm older and I have to watch my body. But like what you said, I had body dysmorphia too. Like once you get to a certain point where I was working out 6 days a week, you eat that pizza and you're like, oh, like, why did I do that? Yeah. But now it's like, I know, like, hey, life isn't perfect. And what is in control for me right now, what makes me feel better is knowing that not everything is in my control. Knowing that, hey, if I can't go to the gym today because I have to, I have to take care of my children, then that's okay. If we want to have a cheat night, here and there and say, let's go with a family and get a pizza. I'm spending time with my family and it happens. We don't make it regular. We try not to make it regular.
Yeah, sure.
It's back to what you said. It's very similar to that.
Yep.
So we could probably talk about all this stuff all day. So why don't you go in a little bit into Mars coaching, and you can tell everyone how you can help athletes and CEOs with what they do.
Sure. So anything connected to having an advisor, professional coaching, training at an organizational level. So that's virtual training, that's in-person training, that's instructional design. I have the tools and the resources with facilitators and systems, learning management system to be able to help shift the culture of any organization and really support. And I think this is why we're really aligned, Zach, for the world of athletes, whether it's teams, professional teams, or individual athletes, not show up as a fan, right? I have a ton of respect for the discipline and the talent and some of the things that I work at really hard at Mars Coaching is maintaining the reputation of not being a fan. I would rather not be in your circle than to tell you something that I think you want to hear.
Yeah.
I would rather not be in the mix than to be that guy who says, hey, I want to get a selfie, or hey, can you, let me just, can I get a loan? And like, I think that athletes are surrounded by people throughout the course of their lives where people want something from them, and that's the opposite of what I am and how I operate. I'm really interested in impact, and that impact involves me helping you get to be as good as you can possibly be so you can serve others. So if that's at an organizational level with a for-profit, a non-for-profit, in the world of athletics or beyond, that's what I can do to support you. And it's been an honor to be on this journey, Zach.
It is. And back to what you said, I agree with you 100%. Going in as not a fan. I mean, that's what I tend to try to do too, because sometimes athletes have some things they need to hear, and they just don't know. And you need to tell them straight up, like, hey, you need to work on this, or this is something that we need to work on, and if you come in as a fan, that's not going to happen.
The best coaches that we've had, they were probably tough on her. Like at the moment, I didn't realize, but now I look back and I was like, he was right. She knew what she was talking about. Like, so you want to be that guy. And that's why, again, I think we're aligned, because it's not for this moment. I'm really supporting you and the next, the best version of you down the road. That's what we're shooting for. So.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate having you on. Again, we could probably talk about this forever. I'll
Sure.
throw all your comments and stuff and the link to your website, your LinkedIn and everything in the
Awesome.
comments when I publish this. Again, it's always a pleasure to have you on, Brian, and I look forward to, we'll see each other again. We see each other. We randomly run into each other here and there at some events. So we'll see each other soon.
Sounds really good. Thank you, and keep doing great things. I love the way you show up, Zach, and you're making a big difference out there in the community with athletes and organizations. So keep up the great work, and thanks so much. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.